Put an article in the paper that we're talking, that we're forming a cooperative, and if anybody has any questions about medical marijuana, they could contact.
That'd be great.
So how do we organize a cooperative league? I think we're ready for that point where we can get 4 or 5 people together, find a site for cultivating, and then distributing it.
12 years ago, it seemed to be a completely novel and to some people a crazy idea to have legal medical marijuana in any states. 12 years later, it has proven to be an experiment that is a tremendous success.
I think what's happening is a lot of the politicians are finally starting to catch up with where the public has been for a long, long time. I come from a conservative Republican county of Orange County, and when I supported Prop 215, some said, gee, this is going to be political suicide. I said, well, I'm a conservative. I'm for limited government, aren't you? Well, yes, I'm a conservative. I believe people ought to control their own lives, don't you? Yes. I'm a conservative. I'm against the government enforcing irrational laws and spending money on that, aren't you? Well, yes, I am. I'm going to vote for it, aren't you? Well, yes, I am. It's going to pass in Orange County, which it did. So I think what you've got kind of in a way is a convergence of those who on the left and on the right as well, finding that they have a lot of common ground on this issue.
We're here at the Los Angeles Patients and Caregivers Group in West Hollywood, California. It's a 5-year-old medical cannabis dispensing collective. We are permitted by the city, a tax-paying organization, and a big part of what we do to protect our community and our patients is to maintain a security culture, to keep everyone safe. And part of that includes screening access to the facility. And so when patients arrive here at the Los Angeles Patients and Caregivers Group, the first thing we do is check their identification and check to make sure they have a copy of their doctor's letter of recommendation.
Where there are no regulations themselves, I think that there's one of two things that have occurred. I think there's been a very harsh or draconian response by local government just saying no activity whatsoever, which I think is very unfortunate because no matter how they try to ignore or exclude or penalize the practice of medical cannabis in their own municipality and county government, it's still happening. And instead of driving an underground and dark environment, subterranean practices like this never work well.
Well, the parade of horribles that everyone predicted has not materialized. The sky has not fallen. To the contrary, I think that California jurisdictions have shown that that having medical cannabis in place does not impact things like public safety or anything of that nature. And if anything, what we want to see is more regulation on the part of not only state but local governments.
Medical marijuana dispensaries ought to pay sales tax. These sales taxes go towards the state fund, and of course that benefits everybody as well. And so there are a number of different ways that the guidelines benefit not just patients but the state at large.
One of the best developed models for regulation in the state of California is in Oakland, where a business licensing and permit process is used to regulate the 4 facilities allowed in the city. And these facilities have to meet a very high standard in safety and in legal integrity in order to get their permits. And each make sure they continue to comply with the local regulations.
Many cities create permits for cannabis dispensaries, and is that the process of creating the permits and the regulations that go with them has actually created a situation where we do have responsible owners who are accountable to the city, and because people can have their permits taken away if they don't abide by local regulation, what we found is that they do behave responsibly.
We want to do this the right way, and it can be done the right way. Once we got our act together, once we finally resolve this and come up with an ordinance that says you can establish it here, you can establish it there, you've got inspections by the police, and I open inspections by the police during business hours. The police should be able to do an inspection to make sure that it's not being abused.
Well, the advice I would give to lawmakers, Congress people, as well as senators, is that I think, one, we need to have the administration support jurisdictions like California that have passed propositions that allow for the distribution of medical cannabis. That's the first thing. So wherever there's a state that has done that type of, taken that type of step, the federal government should pass policy, regulations, whatever it is, to say that in this case, the state can determine what's going to happen with medical marijuana in its jurisdiction, and we're going to butt out as a federal government and not interfere whatsoever.
So I've introduced Senate Joint Resolution 14, which does a number of things. First and foremost, it calls upon the federal government to stop these raids and stop with the intimidation and the interference of the enforcement of state laws which currently allow for the medical use of marijuana.
I think the lessons politically are that the public is ahead of the politicians on this. There is not really a negative price to pay for wanting a more rational approach at marijuana. The idea that you're going to be labeled a pothead or a hippie or all these things, the public is more sophisticated than that, realizing that this substance, like any other substance, can be abused, but it can also work for people who need it. And that those people who have taken a rational approach on this have not paid a negative political price. In fact, they're generally admired for their courage.
This is actually not a controversial issue, and federal lawmakers should not be afraid of it as well. Every poll that I've seen nationally, not just here in California, shows popular support for the medical use of marijuana upwards of 65 to 70%. So this is not a controversial issue. This is not a dangerous issue for any lawmaker.
We want regulations. We want to pay taxes. We want to be good citizens in our community. And that federal pressure keeps us from taking that last step to legitimacy.
During the presidential campaign, candidate Barack Obama said raiding medical marijuana users is not a good use of our resources. After the inauguration, Attorney General Eric Holder backed him up, stating, "What the president said during his campaign is now American policy." Unfortunately, the Drug Enforcement Administration still seems to be mired in the destructive policies of the past. Senator Mark Leno's bill calling on the DEA and the Department of Justice to end the raids was passed by the California State Senate. And Attorney General Eric Holder has issued guidelines discouraging prosecution of patients and providers who comply with state laws. There are dozens of federal cases still pending, so a bipartisan group of congressmen led by Representative Sam Farr of California has introduced the Truth in Trials Act. This would mean federal defendants would no longer be prevented from offering evidence that their use of marijuana was legal under state laws.